Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Among all the characters in the Harry Potter series, Severus Snape stands apart. He went from being the unpopular potions master who personally killed Dumbledore to a tragic hero who loved Harry's mother his entire life. And no matter how complex and multi-layered he was, attentive readers have noticed quite a few strange and contradictory details in his story. Today we'll examine several uncomfortable questions for the potions master. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Why did Dumbledore turn a blind eye to Snape's bias? Let's be honest. Snape was an excellent potions master and a skilled defense against the dark arts specialist, but a terrible teacher. He openly favored Slytherin students while humiliating those from other houses. When Hermione was hit by a cruel hex, he merely made a mocking remark about her appearance. He nitpicked Harry in every lesson while blatantly ignoring the mistakes of Slytherins. He unfairly took and awarded house points, creating an atmosphere of blatant favoritism. It's doubtful that the headmaster of Hogwarts was unaware of this. So why did Dumbledore tolerate such behavior? Was his image as a wise and fair mentor just a beautiful facade? Number 2. Why didn't Dumbledore punish Snape for exposing the truth about Lupin? After Sirius Black escaped, Snape accidentally revealed to everyone that Professor Lupin was a werewolf. This instantly caused outrage among students' parents, forcing Lupin to resign. So Snape deliberately destroyed the reputation of one of the best teachers, driven by personal dislike. And what did Dumbledore do? Nothing. At least, nothing we see in the books. No reprimand. No punishment. Perhaps the headmaster gave Snape a stern talking to off-screen, but that hardly seems like a fair resolution. Number 3. Why did Snape constantly want the defense against the dark arts job? During all 6 of Harry's years at Hogwarts, 2 things remained constant. Something dark and dangerous happened by the end of the year, and the defense against the dark arts position changed hands every year. Rumor had it the post was cursed by Voldemort after he was denied the right to teach students, yet Snape kept requesting the position again and again, each time being refused. Why? Did he not believe in the curse, or did he have a hidden motive? Strangely enough, he never suggested creating a new position like Professor of Counter Curses and Dark Creatures, which sounds far safer. Number 4. How did Snape become so good at occlumency? Occlumency, the ability to shield one's mind from intrusion, was a key skill in Snape's mission as a double agent. If Voldemort had suspected his loyalty for even a moment, Snape would not have survived a day. However, the books never explain how exactly he mastered this rare and difficult skill. Occlumency requires emotional detachment and cold-bloodedness, yet Snape, as we remember, was a man fueled by bitterness and a thirst for revenge, especially in Harry Potter's presence. There's a clear contradiction here. Number 5. How did Snape create Sectumsempra? One of the most mysterious moments in Snape's biography remains the creation of the Sectumsempra curse. We don't fully know how new spells are invented or how they become registered in the wizarding world. What's more, this curse clearly belongs in the extremely dangerous category, if not among the unforgivable curses. How could a schoolboy not only come up with but also perfect such a spell to battle readiness? Number 6. Did Snape really not think about the prophecy? When Snape overheard Trelawney's prophecy, he was already a Death Eater, but still in love with Lily. The words about a boy born at the end of July to parents who had thrice defied Voldemort clearly fit the Potters. Snape was intelligent and well-informed. He should have realized that Lily would be in mortal danger, but for a few minutes, it seems, he forgot his love, because he passed this information to Voldemort, and the Dark Lord did the rest. Number 7. Why didn't Lily's kindness rub off on Snape? Lily Evans and Severus Snape became friends before they even started at Hogwarts. Lily was kind and noble, while Snape was already drawn to the dark arts and kept questionable company. Love usually inspires change, but Snape never seemed to try becoming a better person for Lily's sake. Even when she directly told him she was troubled by his fascination with dark magic, He chose to ignore her words. Number 8. Why did Snape bully Neville, knowing he feared him most? Neville Longbottom tried. He really did. But in Snape's dungeon, effort was never enough. "Longbottom, are you incapable of following simple instructions?" Snape's voice would slice through the air, making Neville's hands shake over the cauldron. When the boggart emerged in Lupin's class, it didn't turn into a Dementor or a monstrous creature. It turned into Snape himself, black robes and all. Everyone laughed when Neville transformed him into a woman's hat and dress, but the truth behind the fear was anything but funny. Snape knew this. He saw the trembling hands, the stammering replies, the way Neville shrank into himself whenever he was addressed. Yet instead of using that knowledge to guide and encourage, he pressed harder. Mistakes were met with scorn, not correction. This wasn't tough love, it was targeted humiliation. For someone later remembered as a hero, Snape seemed blind to the fact that true strength as a teacher is not found in crushing a student's spirit, but in helping it grow. Number 9. Why did Snape think it was acceptable to read teenagers' minds? When Snape began teaching Harry occlumency, it was not a lesson, it was an assault. "Clear your mind," he barked, before plunging into Harry's thoughts, tearing through private memories like pages in a book. Laughter with Ron, Lily's voice in the mirror of Erist, Sirius in Grimmauld Place, nothing was off limits. Harry staggered, cheeks burning, not from pain but from the raw violation. And when he dared to push back with legitimacy of his own, catching a flash of a lonely boy in a dark room, Snape's fury was instant. The stakes were real. Voldemort could use the connection between himself and Harry to manipulate, even possess him, but instead of trust, Snape chose force. Lessons were battles, not partnerships. Harry left each session more resentful, less willing to cooperate, and no closer to mastering the skill. As Harry told Hermione later, "He's not trying to help me, he's trying to humiliate me." The intent might have been protection, but the execution left Harry exposed in more ways than one. Could Snape have taken another path? Yes. A patient mentor could have explained the dangers before storming into a student's mind. He could have built a foundation where Harry understood the stakes and wanted to learn. Instead, Snape's own bitterness poisoned the process. The result was a failed education in occlumency, and an even deeper mistrust between them, at a time when unity mattered most. Number 10. Why did Snape allow the Half-Blood Prince's book to circulate at school? The Old Potions textbook was more than ink and parchment. Inside, neat handwriting marked shortcuts, improvements, and spells never taught in class. For Harry, it was a treasure. For Snape, it was a past self, the Half-Blood Prince, whispering from the margins. "Just shove a bezoar down their throat," one note read casually, turning life or death into a joke. And then there was Sectumsempra, written without warning, for enemies. When Harry used that curse on Draco in the bathroom, the result was chaos. Blood everywhere, Draco gasping, pale, clutching at wounds he couldn't understand. Snape rushed in, stopped the bleeding, and demanded to know where Harry had learned it. The answer must have stung. His own book, his own script. If Snape truly wanted control, why hadn't he locked that textbook away long before? Why allow it to sit in the cabinet, waiting for a curious student? Perhaps it was pride that stayed his hand. Those notes were proof of his brilliance, the private legacy of a boy who wanted to outshine every professor. But brilliance without boundaries can be dangerous. By letting the book circulate, Snape gambled with the safety of his students. In the end, the gamble left scars on Draco's body, on Harry's conscience, and on Snape's claim to be the vigilant guardian he pretended to be. Number 11. Why did love for Lily turn into obsession and hatred for her son? Snape swore to Dumbledore that he would protect Harry Potter. And he did, again and again, often without Harry knowing. Yet, in the classroom, his gaze turned sharp, his voice cutting. He saw James in the tilt of Harry's head, in the defiance in his eyes. "You're just like your father," he spat once, the words dripping with bitterness. In those moments, Harry wasn't Lily's son. He was James reborn, and that was enough to make Snape's temper flare. The irony was cruel. At night, Snape guarded Harry from Voldemort's gaze, his skill in occlumency shielding the boy's mind. By day, he humiliated him over missed ingredients and crooked cauldrons. It was a double life within a double life, protector and tormentor in the same breath. When Harry asked Lupin about Snape's behavior, Lupin sighed. "Your father and Sirius did a number on him. Some wounds don't heal. But how does a wound justify turning a classroom into a battlefield?" The hatred extended to Harry's friends. Ron was mocked for his lack of skill, Hermione for her eagerness. These were not battles for justice. They were echoes of old grudges misplaced on children. Snape never once seemed to look at Harry and think, "This is the boy Lily died for." Instead, he saw the boy James lived for, laughing, flying, winning, and he couldn't let go of that image. Love, when it's real, can soften the sharpest edges. But Snape's love for Lily hardened into something else, an obsession tied to the past, incapable of separating her from the pain James caused him. Protecting Harry was a debt, hurting him was a release. And in that contradiction, Snape trapped himself, never allowing Lily's memory to become a bridge between them, only a wall. Number 12. Why didn't Snape openly stop the Carrows as headmaster? When Severus Snape became headmaster, the Carrows arrived like vultures, Alecto teaching dark arts as if it were a sport, Amicus turning punishment into cruelty. Students were beaten, humiliated, even forced to use the Cruciatus curse. Officially, Snape was keeping the school running. Unofficially, fear ruled the corridors under his portrait. The children whispered his name as part of the enemy. There are hints he tried to help in secret. Neville later spoke of food showing up when you needed it, and of times when Snape's absence gave the a room to breathe, but the Carrows thrived, their grip never loosened. Snape had power over staffing and school policy, yet never publicly reined them in. Even a symbolic reprimand could have sent a signal. Instead, he allowed the cruelty to continue in full view. One night in the Great Hall, Amicus spat in Professor McGonagall's face after accusing her of treason. Snape was there. He said nothing. In that silence, the message was clear. The Carrows acted with impunity. Was it fear of exposing his true loyalties? Or was he convinced that playing the silent accomplice was the only way to protect the greater plan? Whatever the reason, to the students watching, he looked like just another tyrant. If Snape was as cunning and resourceful as his double life demanded, could he not have used Hogwarts' own bureaucracy to box the Carrows in, rearranging schedules, limiting their access to certain areas, or quietly dismantling their authority were all within reach? But the war left no room for half measures, and Snape chose the path that kept his cover intact, even if it meant ruling the school where terror was part of the curriculum. Number 13. Why did Snape agree to kill Dumbledore without finding another way? On the night atop the astronomy tower, everything unfolded with chilling precision. Dumbledore, weakened by the curse of the Horcrux ring, stood unarmed, his voice low. "Severus, please." The words would haunt any witness. Snape's wand rose, the green flash lit the night, and the most powerful wizard in the school crumpled from the battlements. The students saw a murderer, the Order saw a traitor. And yet this was the act Dumbledore himself had demanded. The plan was clear. Snape would spare Draco from becoming a killer and cement Voldemort's trust in himself. But plans are not without choices. If Snape was as brilliant a strategist as his actions suggested, why choose the most brutal option? A staged death, a disappearance under the guise of battle, or even a faked duel could have preserved Dumbledore's life in secret while still protecting Draco. Instead, the castle was left with the echo of a killing curse and the image of its headmaster struck down by a trusted friend. The cost was immense. The Order of the Phoenix fractured under the weight of betrayal. Minerva McGonagall's face, pale and stunned in the Great Hall, told the whole story. Her belief in the school's safety was gone. Harry's rage burned hotter than ever, his cries on the tower, "Coward!" marking Snape forever in the boy's memory as a villain. It wasn't just Dumbledore who fell that night, it was the heart of Hogwarts. Perhaps Snape believed that the direct, irreversible act was the only way to fulfill both the unbreakable vow and Dumbledore's own request. Perhaps mercy, in his mind, meant speed. But mercy can take many forms, and killing in front of the enemy's eyes wasn't the only path. In the end, his choice left scars deeper than the war itself, scars that no revelation of his true loyalty could fully heal. Number 14. Why didn't Snape try to build relationships with other teachers? Severus Snape spent decades walking the same stone corridors, yet remained an island in a sea of colleagues. He was present in the staff room, but never truly part of it. With Minerva McGonagall there was always tension. Their exchanges were clipped, formal, almost brittle. She challenged his disciplinary decisions, and he countered with sharp retorts. With Phileas Flitwick, their relationship never went beyond polite nods and brief discussions about inter-house competitions. And Hagrid avoided him altogether, his booming laugh fading whenever Snape entered the room. Being a spy for Dumbledore and playing both sides meant secrecy, but secrecy need not be isolation. Even in the shadow of war, trust can be built. Yet Snape seemed to reject it outright. There is a moment in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince when McGonagall, speaking to Harry, says of Snape, "I do not like to think badly of my colleagues, Potter, but you must be careful." This is not the voice of a co-worker who feels solidarity. It is the voice of suspicion. That suspicion was earned through years of coldness and calculated distance. A single example stands out. After Dumbledore's death, Snape, as headmaster, could have leaned on McGonagall's loyalty to the school. Instead, he allowed her to believe the worst of him. He gave no explanation, no small gesture to show he was not the enemy. Imagine how much stronger the resistance inside Hogwarts could have been if McGonagall and Snape had shared even a sliver of mutual trust. But for Snape, personal alliances seemed too costly, as if any warmth might crack the mask he wore. Perhaps it was pride, perhaps fear. The man who could shield his mind from the Dark Lord himself could not open it, even slightly, to those who fought on the same side. His brilliance in the art of occlumency became his prison. In locking everyone out, Snape also locked himself away, ensuring that when the final battle came, he would stand alone, both by choice and by consequence. Number 15. Why didn't Snape help Harry understand the prophecy? Severus Snape's life was built upon secrets, layered one upon another until even those closest to him could not see the truth. His mission, the one Albus Dumbledore entrusted to him, was deceptively simple in words, yet crushing in its weight: protect Harry Potter so that he might live long enough to face and defeat Lord Voldemort. Snape carried this burden with the same grim, unyielding resolve that defined him. And yet in all the years Harry spent under his watch, Snape never once tried to explain to the boy the full meaning of the prophecy that shaped both of their fates. The prophecy, foretelling that neither can live while the other survives, was the silent compass by which so many deaths could have been avoided. But Snape, who mastered the delicate art of saying enough to mislead without revealing, never offered even a breadcrumb of its deeper meaning. It is here that the uncomfortable question emerges: why? The prophecy itself was no small matter. Trelawney's trembling voice in the back room of the Hog's Head had marked the beginning of the end for James and Lily Potter. Snape, having overheard part of it, carried the message to Voldemort, unwittingly setting in motion the chain of events that led to their deaths. He spent the rest of his life attempting to atone for that mistake, a penance etched into every decision he made. But if atonement was truly his guiding principle, why not arm Harry with the knowledge he needed? Even if he feared Voldemort discovering the truth through Harry, could he not have found a veiled way to prepare him? The irony is sharp. The man who could weave layers of deception capable of misleading the Dark Lord himself did not attempt a coded warning to the boy whose survival was central to their cause. Harry's ignorance cost lives. Consider Sirius Black. The night at the Department of Mysteries in Order of the Phoenix, Harry was baited into action precisely because he didn't understand how crucial it was to guard information and measure his steps. Believing Sirius was in danger, he rushed headlong into a trap. The consequence was not only Sirius's death, but a massive blow to the morale of those fighting Voldemort. If Snape had, at some earlier point, impressed upon Harry, through a riddle, a parable, or even an obscure hint that there was a larger, inevitable confrontation awaiting him, Harry might have been more cautious. The prophecy could have been framed not as a direct statement, but as an abstract truth about power, destiny, and the dangers of reckless action. Snape was not incapable of such subtlety. This is the man who fed Voldemort carefully curated information for years without ever fully betraying Dumbledore's cause. In The Half-Blood Prince, we see him mislead Bellatrix Lestrange with calm precision, parrying her accusations with statements that reveal nothing essential, yet satisfy her curiosity. A man who could craft such careful narratives surely had the skill to plant ideas in Harry's mind that might later save lives. Yet, instead of mentorship, Harry was met with cold disdain, biting remarks, and outright hostility. The boy who needed guidance most was given only animosity, which not only kept him ignorant but actively pushed him away from someone who might have been his greatest hidden ally. One might argue that Snape's silence was an act of protection, that to speak of the prophecy in any form was to risk Voldemort discovering it through Harry's thoughts. After all, Dumbledore himself warned about the connection between Harry's mind and the Dark Lord's. But the flaw in this reasoning is that Snape already had the tools to guard against such intrusions. As Harry's occlumency teacher, he could have used those lessons not only to block Voldemort's access, but also to layer in protective fragments of truth. Yet those sessions collapsed into bitterness and mutual resentment, with Snape making little effort to inspire trust or cooperation. Instead of creating a mental fortress that could safely hold the prophecy, Snape left Harry's mind as vulnerable as it had been before, widening the very risk he claimed to be avoiding. There's a scene in The Half-Blood Prince where Dumbledore tells Harry, "You are the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord." It is as close to the truth as Harry had ever heard up to that point. That statement could have come years earlier, perhaps from Snape himself in a moment disguised as a lesson in magical theory or dueling tactics. Instead, Harry spent his formative years in the fight against Voldemort piecing together fragments, often misinterpreting them, and making choices in the dark. Snape, who had a clearer picture than anyone, except Dumbledore, chose to let him stumble. Perhaps Snape's personal feelings played a greater role than strategy. His hatred of James Potter bled into every interaction with Harry, clouding his judgment and making every opportunity for guidance feel like a chance to wound rather than teach. Protecting Harry from physical harm was one thing, speaking to him without venom was quite another. Even in moments when Snape acted to save him, blocking curses, providing potions, or deflecting suspicion, he did so without a shred of warmth. It is difficult to imagine him swallowing his pride long enough to deliver a carefully coded prophecy lesson to the son of the man he loathed. The tragedy here is that Harry would have listened if only the message had been wrapped in a form he could accept. Imagine Snape telling him during an occlumency lesson, "There will come a day when you must face your enemy not with your wand, but with the full weight of your choices." Such a sentence reveals nothing explicit to Voldemort, yet sets a seed in Harry's mind that could grow into understanding. Instead, their relationship was so poisoned that any such comment would likely have been dismissed as a taunt or threat. Snape's inability or unwillingness to bridge that gap ensured the seed was never planted. Number 16. Why didn't Snape act against Draco when he knew about his mission? In the shadowed corridors of Hogwarts during Harry's 6th year, Severus Snape carried a knowledge that weighed heavier than any unforgivable curse. He knew that Draco Malfoy, barely 16, had been tasked by Lord Voldemort with an assassination, Albus Dumbledore's assassination. Snape's own life was already entangled in a dangerous web of loyalty and deceit, and the unbreakable vow he made to Narcissa Malfoy bound him to protect Draco and, if necessary, finish the job himself. Yet in the months that followed, Snape did not remove Draco from this perilous path. Instead, the boy wandered the castle, tinkering with cursed necklaces and poisoned mead, fumbling through plots that endangered the lives of others. This inaction is the uncomfortable question that lingers over Snape's legacy. Why did he not act sooner? It is undeniable that Snape was walking a knife's edge. His position as a double agent relied on Voldemort's trust, and meddling too obviously in Draco's mission could have drawn suspicion. But the stakes were not abstract. When Katie Bell was cursed by the opal necklace in October, it was not simply a failed attempt, it was a near-fatal incident that left a Gryffindor student fighting for her life in St. Mungo's. Snape, skilled in legilimency and always watchful, could not have been oblivious to the danger Draco's crude methods posed. He could have intervened, subtly redirecting Draco's efforts or sabotaging them entirely without exposure. Yet the boy continued, and the danger escalated. Draco's second attempt, the poisoned mead intended for Dumbledore, came perilously close to claiming another innocent life. It was delivered by accident to Ron Weasley, who spent hours in agony, only surviving due to Harry's quick thinking and the presence of Bezoar. Snape, as the potions master, would have known instantly that the poison was sophisticated, not the result of mere happenstance. It is here that the reader feels the tension between Snape's intellect and his choices. He could have recognized the pattern forming, understood that Draco was running out of control, and taken steps to halt him. Yet he did not, at least not in a way that removed Draco entirely from the mission. Snape's own words in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince reveal an awareness of the moral burden placed on Draco. When he confronted the boy in the deserted bathroom moments before Harry's arrival, he said sharply, "You're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. You're putting yourself and others in danger." The choice of words is telling. Snape acknowledges the danger, yet still frames Draco's failure in terms of efficiency, not morality. This suggests that his priority was never to stop Draco, but to ensure that the mission, one way or another, did not fail in Voldemort's eyes. One might argue that Snape's inaction was a form of strategy, allowing Draco to exhaust his options and thus make it easier for Snape to step in at the critical moment. After all, if Snape had removed Draco from the board too early, Voldemort's wrath might have fallen directly on the Malfoy family. But such reasoning does little to explain why Snape allowed the boy to continue experimenting with lethal magic inside the school, a place teeming with innocent children. Snape was capable of intricate magical manipulations. He could have devised a failure for Draco that appeared legitimate without risking casualties. The reality is that Snape's loyalties were layered in ways that made decisive action nearly impossible. He had sworn to protect Draco, but he had also promised Dumbledore to shield Harry and maintain his cover. Dumbledore's own insistence that his death should be on Snape's terms further complicated the matter. As Dumbledore put it during their private conversation, "You must kill me, Severus. It is the only way." In this web of commands, Snape's choice to wait may have been his attempt to obey everyone at once, but such an attempt required turning a blind eye to the immediate harm Draco was capable of causing. From a purely tactical standpoint, Snape may have believed that every failed attempt by Draco made the boy more desperate and thus more pliable to Snape's influence. This culminated in the astronomy tower scene, where Draco, disarmed but still trembling, admitted, "I've got to do it. He'll kill me." Snape's arrival in that moment was perfectly timed to fulfill the unbreakable vow and spare Draco from making the irreversible choice. Yet this precision also implies foreknowledge. If Snape could anticipate the critical moment so accurately, he could surely have intervened earlier with the same efficiency. Draco's months of trial and error also offered Voldemort a cruel form of entertainment. By assigning such a monumental task to a schoolboy, the Dark Lord ensured that Draco would either succeed and be celebrated, or fail and be destroyed, dragging his family down with him. Snape, ever the reader of minds, would have recognized this psychological trap. His silence may have been an attempt to spare Draco the humiliation of obvious failure by letting him try while quietly preparing to take over. But in doing so, Snape allowed the boy to spiral deeper into isolation, paranoia, and dangerous improvisation. It is worth remembering that Snape himself was no stranger to dangerous assignments at a young age. He had joined the Death Eaters as a teenager and knew the intoxicating pull of being trusted with a great secret. In Draco, Snape may have seen a reflection of his own youthful self, arrogant, determined, yet wholly unprepared for the real cost of such loyalty. Perhaps this recognition fostered a kind of grim patience in Snape, a belief that Draco had to reach the breaking point himself before accepting rescue. This, however, makes his inaction no less questionable to those who see the wasted opportunities to avert harm. Number 17. Why did Snape humiliate Ron and Hermione while protecting Harry? In the cold dungeons of Hogwarts, where the light was always dim and the air smelled faintly of potions and mildew, Severus Snape's voice could slice through the silence like a whip. For Harry Potter, those cutting words were familiar, an unpleasant rhythm to every potions lesson. Yet what puzzled many was not simply the sharpness aimed at Harry, but the way Snape's barbs often lashed out at those standing beside him. Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger were not the boy who lived, nor were they the children of James Potter. They were Harry's friends, his closest allies, and yet Snape seemed determined to humiliate them just as ruthlessly, as though their association alone was enough to earn his contempt. One of the most vivid examples comes in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, during a potions lesson when Neville Longbottom's toad, Trevor, becomes the unwilling subject of an experiment. Snape's cruelty extends to Neville, but also spills over to Hermione. When Hermione tries to answer a question to help Neville avoid disaster, Snape cuts her down sharply, sneering that she is an insufferable know-it-all. The moment is striking not because it is new. Snape had belittled her before, but because it happens in front of the entire class, with Harry watching helplessly. The insult has nothing to do with safety, nothing to do with protecting Harry. It is an attack on a young girl whose greatest crime is knowledge. Ron, too, was no stranger to Snape's disdain. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, after the infamous Quidditch match, where Harry's arm is broken by a rogue bludger, Ron's attempts to defend Harry in Snape's presence only earn him derision. Snape's words are measured but scathing, undermining Ron's confidence in a way that lingers. It is not just the content of the insult, it is the deliberate choice to do it in public, to strip away dignity where others can see. For a boy like Ron, who already wrestled with feelings of inadequacy in the shadow of his older brothers, those moments cut deep. The irony, of course, is that Snape was supposed to be Harry's protector. Dumbledore trusted him with that task. He could be sharp with Harry, one might argue, to keep the boy alert, cautious, perhaps even distrustful of adults who could harm him. But the logic begins to unravel when we consider how often Snape's cruelty extended to Harry's support system. A strong moral rear, to borrow a military term, was essential to keeping Harry grounded. Ron and Hermione were not just classmates, they were his strategists, his comfort, the ones who stood in front of danger with him. By undermining them, Snape was weakening the very circle that kept Harry alive. Consider the Yule Ball in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. The event is supposed to be a night of celebration, yet Snape patrols the hallways like a hawk, looking for troublemakers. When Ron, wearing his second-hand dress robes, is spotted by Snape later in the evening, there is a pause where Snape's eyes flick over the lace and frills, and though no words are spoken to Ron directly in that scene, the look itself is loaded with the same derision that had been voiced so many times before. It is the kind of silent judgment that reinforces Ron's insecurity about his family's poverty, a wound that needed no deepening from someone meant to be guarding Harry's morale. Hermione faced her own set of humiliations. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, during a particularly tense defense against the dark arts discussion, Snape, covering for the absent Umbridge, finds an opportunity to make a sly remark about her over-preparedness. "You are like an encyclopedia with a pulse," he says, his lip curling in disdain. It is framed as a joke, but the subtext is poison. For Hermione, whose value to Harry lay partly in her ability to think quickly and offer solutions, these jabs were calculated blows. They told her, and everyone else in the room, that her intelligence was something to mock rather than respect. What makes these moments so uncomfortable is that they do not align with the idea of a purely strategic harshness. If Snape had been a cold but fair instructor, focused solely on keeping Harry alive, one might expect him to strengthen Harry's friends. He could have fostered their talents, ensured they were sharp and capable for the dangers ahead. Instead, he seemed to relish the chance to plant seeds of self-doubt. This does not read like battlefield conditioning. It reads like personal vendetta. The roots of that vendetta are not hard to trace. Ron, with his easy laughter and loyalty to Harry, may have reminded Snape of the Gryffindor camaraderie he himself had been excluded from as a student. Hermione, with her intellect and stubborn moral compass, might have stirred memories of Lily Evans, but without the softening warmth that made Lily his friend. Every interaction with them seemed to carry echoes of Snape's own schoolyard grievances, refracted through decades of bitterness. It is telling that his tone with Slytherin students was never quite as vicious. Even in discipline, there was a faint edge of favoritism. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, the tension reaches a quiet peak when Snape publicly ridicules Ron's Quidditch abilities, saying, "I suppose you're the Weasley who thinks he can play." The comment is cruel not just for its sting, but for its timing, delivered when Ron is already under pressure to perform well for his team. Harry, sitting nearby, can feel the blow almost as if it were aimed at him. He knows that Ron's confidence is fragile and that Snape's words will echo long after the match ends. Again, there is no strategic benefit here. Humiliating Ron on the eve of an important game serves no protective function. Number 18. Why didn't Snape try to openly correct his past mistakes? When the dust settled after the Battle of Hogwarts and the wizarding world tried to find its footing again, Severus Snape's story became a posthumous legend. Harry Potter himself publicly defended Snape, calling him the bravest man I ever knew. His memories, poured like liquid silver into the pensieve, revealed the truth. A double agent who risked everything to protect the son of the woman he loved. Yet, if we rewind to the years before his death, an uncomfortable truth remains. Snape never made a visible effort to correct the harm he caused in life. He never stood before a class and admitted that tormenting Neville Longbottom had been wrong. He never spoke a kind word to Hermione Granger after calling her a filthy little mudblood's friend, by implication, through his cold contempt. He never told Remus Lupin, a man he exposed and humiliated, that he regretted it. In the public eye there was no apology, only the scowling mask. The defense often offered is that Snape had to maintain his cover. As a trusted lieutenant of Voldemort, every word and gesture could be weighed against him. The Death Eaters believed in cruelty. To show kindness might have meant death. Yet this reasoning falters when we examine the quiet, unobserved moments. There were times when no Dark Lord's gaze was upon him, No Death Eater lingered nearby. When Neville's boggart took the form of Snape himself, trembling in oversized robes, Snape could have softened the fear with a kind word after class. Instead, he maintained the icy disdain that ensured Neville's dread would remain. In Prisoner of Azkaban, the text reads, Snape looked as though someone had just rubbed him the wrong way with a long, sharp file. The coldness wasn't always an act. It seemed habitual. Some would argue that Snape's silence was a shield against vulnerability. For decades, he had wrapped himself in the armor of sarcasm, control, and intimidation. In his youth, he was humiliated by James Potter and Sirius Black, rejected by Lily Evans, and seduced by the promises of power Voldemort offered. That cocktail of bitterness and shame doesn't dissolve overnight. But even knowing this, the question remains. Did Snape ever want to change how others saw him, or did he cling to the shadow because it felt safer? The war ended, but no moment came when Snape stood openly for reconciliation. Consider his relationship with Harry. Snape's memories prove that he protected Harry for Lily's sake, but to Harry himself, Snape offered only contempt. In Order of the Phoenix, when Harry's efforts in occlumency falter, Snape spits, "You are just like your father, lazy, arrogant." This wasn't Voldemort listening. This was a private lesson, an unguarded moment where Snape could have chosen encouragement over cruelty. It was an opportunity to mentor, to guide, to show a sliver of humanity. He chose the familiar mask. Hermione Granger's experience with Snape adds another layer. She was one of the brightest witches of her age, yet Snape undermined her with withering remarks about her appearance and eagerness to learn. In Prisoner of Azkaban, when Hermione correctly answered a question, Snape said coldly, 5 points from Gryffindor for being an insufferable know-it-all. This was no strategic Death Eater cruelty, it was petty and personal. Years later, Hermione would stand beside Harry in defending Snape's memory, but she never received even a whispered acknowledgement that he had been unfair. Even with his colleagues, Snape's interactions were laced with antagonism. His treatment of Remus Lupin during Lupin's year as defense against the dark arts teacher went beyond professional disagreement. When Lupin was forced to resign after his condition became public, Snape's loose tongue played a role in spreading the news. One might excuse this as resentment toward the marauders, but the war had long since given him the moral high ground to act differently. He didn't take it. Instead, he allowed old grudges to guide his actions. Some might point to his work in the shadows as proof that he was making amends in his own way. Spying on Voldemort, protecting students when he could, delivering false information to the Death Eaters, all of this risked his life. But redemption, for all its secrecy, often has a public face. Other characters in the series, Draco Malfoy for example, show visible signs of change, however subtle. Snape never gave that satisfaction to anyone. To the end, he seemed content to let the world believe the worst of him. His decision to maintain that facade might also speak to a deeper pride. Severus Snape was a man who controlled every aspect of his image. To admit fault openly would have meant admitting weakness, not just to others, but to himself. After Lily's death, he devoted his existence to one mission: protect Harry. Everything else, friendships, apologies, reconciliation, became irrelevant. In Deathly Hallows, Dumbledore asks him if he has grown to care for the boy, and Snape's furious, "For him? Expecto Patronum," reveals that all his loyalty and tenderness were reserved for the dead, not the living. There is also the question of whether Snape believed he deserved forgiveness. His youth was marked by choices that directly led to Lily's death. He had carried that guilt for years, and perhaps in his own mind, nothing could erase it. If he already saw himself as irredeemable, why bother mending smaller wounds? Yet this reasoning collapses when we remember that others, like Sirius Black, also bore the weight of guilt but still reached out to mend relationships. Snape's refusal feels deliberate, not inevitable. Neville's story offers one of the most striking examples of missed opportunity. Years after the war, Neville would tell his students at Hogwarts about Snape's bravery, but imagine if Snape himself had told Neville even once, "You have grown stronger than I imagined." That single sentence could have changed the boy's memories of him forever. Instead, Neville's final words about Snape are tinged with respect, but no affection. It's telling that in Deathly Hallows, when Harry names his son Albus Severus, the choice shocks everyone. Snape's heroism was known, but his humanity remained a mystery. The absence of open atonement leaves a scar on Snape's legacy. It raises the uncomfortable idea that he didn't want to let go of the role he had built for himself. The feared, untouchable figure who controlled every room he entered. Power, even the power to intimidate, can be intoxicating. Without it, Snape might have felt exposed. His scowl, his cutting remarks, his refusal to bend. These were the tools he used to survive a world that had once chewed him up and spat him out. We cannot forget that Snape's death robbed him of the chance to live in a post-war world where he might have changed. Perhaps he would have softened, perhaps not. But given the decades of entrenched behavior, change would have been an uphill battle. The fact that he didn't take small steps earlier suggests he might never have tried. His courage was unquestionable in matters of life and death. In matters of the heart, he faltered. The tragedy of Snape's story is not just the life he led, but the relationships he never healed. Harry forgave him, but that forgiveness came without reciprocation. Hermione understood his sacrifices, but never received acknowledgement for the wounds he inflicted. Neville respected his role in the war, but carried the memory of a professor who mocked and belittled him. These were not just strategic deceptions, they were personal choices. Looking back, the question becomes sharper. Why did Severus Snape never step into the light, even briefly, to show kindness without condition? The war was long and its horrors many, but moments of humanity could have existed alongside secrecy. His life was full of masks, and perhaps when the time came, he no longer knew how to remove them. For all his bravery, he seemed incapable of vulnerability in the presence of the living. Snape's story will always invite conflicting views: hero, villain, martyr, bully. But it is this absence of visible atonement that remains one of the most human flaws in a man otherwise elevated to near myth. His silence speaks loudly, not of evil, but of the prison we build for ourselves when we cling to the shadows. Perhaps he never stepped forward because for Severus Snape, the shadows had become home. Number 19. Why didn't Snape stop Slytherins from bullying others? Draco Malfoy's smug smirk in the Hogwarts corridors was not just an act of teenage arrogance. It was a declaration of power. His father's wealth and influence gave him confidence, but it was the silent, unshakable presence of Professor Severus Snape that made him untouchable. The head of Slytherin House rarely needed to lift a finger. His students understood perfectly well that his shadow was enough to protect them from consequences. In the pages of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, we see Draco feign injury after the Hippogriff incident, his pale face twisted in mock pain, fully aware that Snape would take his side without hesitation. This pattern was not an isolated moment. It was part of a larger question that hangs over Snape's legacy. Why, when he witnessed bullying from his own house, did he do nothing to stop it? The corridors of Hogwarts were battlegrounds of subtle cruelty. Slytherin students did not merely tease, they targeted weaknesses with surgical precision. Neville Longbottom's clumsiness, Ron Weasley's second-hand robes, Hermione Granger's muggle-born status, all were turned into weapons by Malfoy, Crabbe and Hunt and Goyle. Snape saw it. He was there in potions class when Malfoy muttered "mudblood" under his breath, or sneered at Neville's latest failed concoction. Instead of reprimanding the offenders, Snape would often turn his sharp words on the victims, amplifying their humiliation. In Harry Potter and The Philosopher's Stone, when Neville's potion melted into an acidic mess, Snape's comment was not a warning to the Slytherins who laughed, but a cold, "Why do you bother breathing?" directed at Neville himself. The bullying became a spectacle, and the authority figure in the room sanctioned it by inaction, or worse, by example. It is tempting to excuse this as a tactical choice to preserve loyalty within his house by never undermining his own. Snape was, after all, navigating dangerous political waters. Many Slytherins had Death Eater connections, and Malfoy was the son of Lucius, an influential figure in the Ministry and Voldemort's circle. Perhaps Snape feared that openly disciplining his students would cost him their trust, making them less likely to share information in darker times. But this reasoning falters when one considers that protecting students from harassment is a core duty of any teacher. Even if he sought to maintain his standing in Slytherin, there were subtle ways to curb their behavior without public displays. Snape, however, seemed unwilling to attempt even that. The image of a Slytherin gang circling a lone Gryffindor in the courtyard is burned into the memory of many Hogwarts students. Once, in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Malfoy and his friends taunted Harry about his fame, waving the Potter Stinks badges with malicious glee. The laughter echoed in the stone archways, and other students watched in uncomfortable silence. Snape passed by that day. His eyes flicked toward the scene, but he continued on, the hem of his black robes sweeping the ground as though the incident were beneath his concern. In that moment, the message to every onlooker was clear. Slytherin aggression was permissible, even in full view of authority. Snape's behavior in class further cemented this imbalance. Potions was not merely a lesson in ingredients and cauldrons, it was a stage for public shaming. When Harry's potion turned the wrong shade of green, Snape's voice would cut across the room, dripping with sarcasm, while Malfoy smirked in the background. When Hermione answered too eagerly, he would coolly deduct points, giving the Slytherins tacit permission to snicker. This selective discipline sent a powerful message to his house. Not only would their mockery be tolerated, it would be reinforced by their professor's own bias. One cannot ignore Snape's past when considering this question. He himself was once the target of relentless bullying at the hands of James Potter and Sirius Black. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Sirius admits, "Snape's always been bitter about that." One might expect that such a history would make him empathetic to students enduring similar treatment. Yet in a cruel twist, it seemed to harden him instead. Rather than shielding those who suffered, Snape aligned himself with the bullies when they wore Slytherin colors. It was as if, by protecting them, he could rewrite his own history, ensuring that the Slytherins under his watch would never be as powerless as he once was. The problem is that this loyalty came at the expense of other children's safety and dignity. Neville Longbottom's near-paralyzing fear of potions class was not simply about the subject's difficulty. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, when Lupin's boggart turns into Snape, it is a testament to years of belittlement and public embarrassment. Neville feared Snape more than he feared creatures from his worst nightmares. That kind of fear does not grow in a vacuum. It is cultivated, watered, and allowed to flourish when an authority figure becomes both the source of ridicule and the enabler of others' cruelty. Some might argue that Snape's deep-cover mission for Dumbledore left no room for small acts of kindness that might expose his true loyalties. But kindness does not require grand gestures. A sharp word to Malfoy in private, a subtle deduction of points, a neutralizing remark when tensions escalated. These would not have compromised his position. In fact, they might have strengthened it, making him appear even-handed. Yet Snape avoided even these minimal interventions. This avoidance speaks less of strategy and more of personal choice, shaped by his grudges, bitterness, and the emotional armor he wore. One particularly telling incident occurred in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. Malfoy was visibly involved in suspicious activities, disappearing from class and whispering in corners. While this was part of Voldemort's plan, it was also accompanied by an increase in Malfoy's hostility toward others, especially Gryffindors. Snape, bound by an unbreakable vow to protect Malfoy, seemed to shield him from any scrutiny. This protection extended beyond physical safety into moral impunity, allowing Malfoy to operate with open malice, knowing his professor would cover for him. The bullying thrived under that invisible shield. The imbalance in Snape's discipline also had a corrosive effect on the school's atmosphere. Gryffindors, Hufflepuffs, and Ravenclaws learned to keep their heads down when Slytherins prowled the halls. Friendships across houses were strained, as siding with a victim risked drawing Slytherin retaliation. Hogwarts was meant to be a sanctuary for young witches and wizards, a place where they could grow without fear. Snape's favoritism warped that sanctuary, creating pockets of hostility where some students felt constantly under siege. It is worth noting that Snape's selective blindness was not merely about house pride, it was also a reflection of his world-view. He measured people by their potential usefulness in the larger war, and in his eyes, Slytherins were assets to be cultivated. Gryffindors were liabilities, reminders of old wounds, and therefore less deserving of protection. This cold calculus might make sense in the corridors of espionage, but in a classroom, it is a betrayal. The victims were not soldiers in his private war. They were children, some barely 11 years old, facing cruelty while their teacher turned away. The human cost of this neglect is perhaps most visible in the smaller, quieter moments. Imagine Hermione sitting stiffly in her chair after a cutting remark from Malfoy about her blood status, trying not to let her hands shake as she writes her notes. Snape's gaze passes over her, and instead of calling out the insult, he marks her for showing off. The Slytherins grin, the Gryffindors exchange glances, and the cycle continues. Each unchecked insult reinforces the unspoken rule. Some voices in Hogwarts matter more than others. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, when the dueling club turns into a public spectacle of Harry speaking Parseltongue, Malfoy's mocking is immediate and vicious. Snape, who could have quelled the crowd's murmurs with a few well-placed words, instead observes with calculated detachment. The moment passes, the tension remains, and the Slytherins leave with another victory in their quiet campaign of intimidation. Small interventions in such moments could have reshaped the power dynamics in the school. Snape's silence, however, made those dynamics unshakable. The question, then, is not whether Snape saw the bullying. He did. The question is why he chose to let it flourish. Whether out of bitterness, strategy, or misplaced loyalty, his inaction made him complicit. For the victims, the memory of Slytherin cruelty was always tied to the sight of their professor's dark silhouette in the corner of the room, watching, judging, but never intervening. And that, perhaps, is the most uncomfortable truth about Severus Snape. In his quest to protect what he valued most, he allowed countless smaller battles to be lost right in front of him. Number 20. Why did Snape let Harry learn about betrayal from Sirius? Severus Snape's presence in the hospital wing that night was anything but accidental. He had been standing only a few feet from Harry when the boy, pale and frantic, burst into the room looking for help. Harry's voice carried urgency, his words tumbling over each other, but Snape's response was measured, almost cold. Harry's mind was a storm. Visions of Sirius Black being tortured in the Department of Mysteries filled his thoughts, every instinct screaming at him to act immediately. Yet, in that moment when clarity was needed most, Snape gave him nothing that resembled clear instruction. Instead, he offered vague phrases, stiff glances, and a demeanor that bordered on dismissive. That single failure in communication would set in motion a chain of events that could not be reversed. The book makes the moment unmistakably tense. Harry tells Snape about his vision, but Snape's reaction is deliberately restrained. "What message?" he asks, as if weighing the value of every word before committing to it. For a boy who had never trusted Snape, the guarded tone sounded like mockery. But the deeper problem was that Harry did not understand the coded exchange Snape attempted. By referring to Padfoot and hinting at the place where it is hidden, Snape was trying to send word to the Order without revealing too much to possible eavesdroppers. The flaw in this strategy was obvious. Harry had no way of knowing whether Snape understood the danger or whether he was simply ignoring it. In Harry's mind, this was the worst possible time for riddles. Snape knew Harry's temperament. He had taught him for nearly 5 years, seen him rush into danger without thinking, and watched him push back against authority when lives were at stake. In fact, Snape had often used this recklessness as ammunition against him in the classroom. Knowing this, it is striking how little he adjusted his behavior in that crucial moment. If his true goal was to protect the boy, there was nothing stopping him from saying, in plain and unambiguous terms, that help was on its way and Harry must stay put. Instead, Snape left Harry in limbo, forcing him to choose between waiting passively and acting on his own. The irony lies in Snape's deep involvement with the Order of the Phoenix. He had a direct line to Dumbledore. At any point, he could have excused himself from the hospital wing and sent a Patronus message to the headmaster or other members of the Order to confirm Sirius's location. The fact that he did so only after Harry stormed out shows a hesitation that proved deadly. Some will argue that Snape was playing a dangerous double game, that any overt move might have exposed his position as a spy. But the setting, inside Hogwarts in the relative safety of the castle, offered a rare moment where subtlety was less important than speed. Snape's personal feelings towards Sirius cannot be ignored. The enmity between them stretched back to their school days, when Sirius had once lured Snape toward the Whomping Willow in a prank that nearly got him killed. In Order of the Phoenix, their exchanges drip with venom. Snape refers to Sirius as the usual lazy, useless lump of a man, and treats him as if his confinement to Grimmauld Place is deserved punishment. Against that backdrop, it is difficult to believe that Snape was wholly motivated by concern for Sirius's safety. If there was ever a moment where his disdain could bleed into professional judgment, it was here. The consequences of this misstep were catastrophic. Misinterpreting Snape's lack of clarity as unwillingness to act, Harry gathered Ron, Hermione, Neville, Luna, and Ginny and flew to London. The trap at the Department of Mysteries had been meticulously prepared by Lord Voldemort and his Death Eaters. Bellatrix Lestrange's laughter still rang in Harry's ears long after the duel that ended Sirius's life. The curtain in the death chamber swallowed Sirius without resistance, and Harry's own cries filled the ministry halls. All of it began with the uncertainty in the hospital wing, a void where clear guidance should have been. It is important to note that Snape did act eventually. He informed the Order and contacted members who could confirm Sirius's whereabouts, but by the time they reached the Ministry, the battle was already raging. The damage was done. Even Harry, in the aftermath, wondered if Snape's delay had been deliberate. The text leaves room for interpretation. Was it a calculated pause to maintain cover, or a subconscious hesitation rooted in hatred for Sirius? Either possibility casts a long shadow over Snape's claim of loyalty to Dumbledore's mission. When we examine Snape's role through the lens of responsibility, the picture becomes more troubling. Teachers at Hogwarts are charged with the safety of their students above all else. Snape, despite his spy work, was still Harry's professor. In a life-or-death situation, the first duty is to the child in front of you. That duty includes giving instructions that can be understood, especially to a young person in distress. By choosing to speak in code, Snape put operational secrecy ahead of Harry's comprehension, a choice that proved fatal to Sirius. Some readers defend Snape by pointing to Harry's lack of trust. Even if Snape had been more direct, they argue, Harry might not have listened. But this underestimates the power of authoritative clarity in a moment of panic. Harry might have bristled at Snape's tone, but if he had been told firmly and unmistakably that Sirius was safe and that reinforcements were on the way, he would have had to pause. That pause could have given Snape enough time to confirm the truth and avert the disaster. The moment also speaks to Snape's complex psychology. He was a man who thrived on control of his classroom, control of his secrets, control of the delicate balance between Voldemort and Dumbledore. Conceding to Harry's emotional state in that instant would have meant relinquishing control to chaos, something Snape had spent years resisting. Perhaps in his mind, keeping the conversation coded was a way to remain in command of the situation. Tragically, that control was an illusion. There is a passage in the book that underscores the disconnect. When Harry bursts into Umbridge's office later, attempting to use her fireplace to contact the Order, Snape tells her blandly, "No idea what he's talking about." It is a performance, of course, meant to shield his true allegiance, but it also reinforces the sense that Harry is alone in deciphering the truth. The boy's growing desperation is palpable. By the time Snape finally moves, Harry's path is already set. Looking back, one cannot help but see the moment as a fulcrum, a point where history could have pivoted. A handful of words spoken plainly might have saved Sirius Black. The tragedy is not just in the loss of life, but in the knowledge that this loss was preventable. It forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about Snape. His brilliance and bravery was sometimes undermined by his pettiness, and those moments cost dearly. Snape's defenders often highlight his ultimate sacrifice, his years of dangerous double-agent work, and his love for Lily Potter as proof of his heroism. These are undeniable facets of his character, but heroism is also tested in the split-second decisions of everyday crises. In that test, in the hospital wing, Snape faltered. Whether through old grudges, a miscalculated need for secrecy, or a cold adherence to his own rules, he let a boy's panic spiral unchecked. For Harry, the loss of Sirius was a wound that never fully healed. It was the second time he had seen a parental figure vanish before his eyes, powerless to stop it. In his mind, the adults who should have protected him, Snape foremost among them, had failed. That failure became part of the bitter complexity of their relationship, feeding the mistrust that lingered until Snape's final revelations in Deathly Hallows. The question remains haunting because it is rooted in the simplest of human expectations, that when a child calls for help, an adult will answer clearly. Snape's choice to answer in riddles is not just a quirk of his spycraft, but a moment where his humanity bent under the weight of old resentments. The cost of that moment was paid in the death chamber, where the veil fell and Harry's godfather was lost forever. Number 21. Why didn't Snape use his influence to improve potions classes? Severus. Snape's classroom was not merely a place for brewing potions. It was a crucible of tension where every flicker of hesitation could mean humiliation. For all his skill, for all his unparalleled knowledge of potion-making, Snape seemed determined to let his students experience the subject as a battlefield rather than a workshop of wonders. He possessed an intellect that could have turned potions into the most inspiring and beloved subject at Hogwarts. Instead, it became for many, Neville Longbottom, Seamus Finnegan, even Hermione Granger in her earliest classes, a place of dread. The irony is unavoidable. Here was a man capable of creating advanced concoctions like Wolfsbane potion and experimental brews most wizards had never even heard of, yet he offered none of this magic as inspiration to his students. His lessons were structured in a way that discouraged curiosity. The instructions, delivered in that trademark cold drawl, were precise but unaccompanied by context or explanation. Snape never told the first-year students why certain ingredients reacted violently, nor did he share the fascinating history of ancient potions. For example, when the class was tasked with brewing the Boil-Cure potion in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Snape merely prowled between desks waiting for mistakes to pounce on, rather than explaining the origin of the recipe. Or why nettles and snake fangs formed such a potent combination. This withholding of narrative stripped the subject of its natural allure. Potions could have been the chemistry of the magical world, Dangerous, yes, but also captivating. But Snape chose an approach that buried its beauty under layers of fear. One cannot ignore the effect his personal biases had on the classroom atmosphere. Harry's very first lesson became an opportunity for Snape to target him with barbed questions, not to assess his ability but to undermine him in front of the class. Quoting directly from the book, Snape's first words to Harry were, "Potter, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" It was less a test of knowledge and more a trap, one set for a boy who had never so much as held a wand before arriving at Hogwarts. Such moments revealed a teaching style driven not by the desire to inspire but by the need to assert control and superiority. It's worth considering what might have been had Snape approached his subject differently. Imagine a first-year potions class where the students were encouraged to experiment under supervision, learning from minor failures rather than fearing them. Snape could have introduced legendary recipes like Felix Felicis in theory lessons to ignite ambition, or demonstrated the artistry behind creating Polyjuice Potion, not as an illicit secret stumbled upon by desperate Gryffindors in their second year, but as a master's craft to be admired. Even the simplest brews could have been presented as stepping stones to great achievements. Instead, Neville Longbottom's recurring disasters became the running joke of the class, an outcome more of the professor's intimidation than of Neville's lack of potential. Some defenders of Snape might argue that his hostility was a shield, that his treatment of Gryffindors and favoritism towards Slytherins was a calculated part of his cover as a double agent. But this reasoning does not explain the years before Voldemort's return, when Snape had no immediate need to maintain such an aggressive stance. His attitude toward most students was not a tactical mask, it was habitual. The fear he instilled had the unintended consequence of stifling natural talent. Even Hermione, who excelled despite his demeanor, learned to associate potions with tension rather than joy. Her perfectionism driven more by a desire to avoid criticism than by love of the craft. Snape's talent was, by all accounts, extraordinary. He invented his own spells and improved potion recipes in his personal notes, as Harry later discovered in the Half-Blood Prince's annotated textbook. These adjustments were the mark of a true innovator, someone who understood not just the theory but the living, breathing essence of potion making. Yet none of this innovation ever entered the classroom. The students brewed from the same stagnant instructions year after year, while Snape's genius remained locked in the margins of a book hidden away in a cupboard. One must ask why he never shared these improvements, even with his most promising students like Draco Malfoy or, potentially, Hermione Granger. One specific example underscores the wasted opportunity. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Snape provided Professor Lupin with regular batches of Wolfsbane Potion, a highly complex brew few wizards could produce. This act, though cloaked in professional courtesy, was a miracle of precision and timing. The process could have served as an advanced learning project for any WT-level students, teaching them not only about potion making, but about compassion, how a potion could change a person's life. Instead, it was brewed in secret, its significance never explained to the broader student body. Such secrecy robbed the subject of real-world meaning. The most troubling aspect of Snape's teaching is that it actively discouraged weaker students from improving. Neville Longbottom's plight is the clearest example. Neville's fear of Snape was so intense that his potion-making suffered disastrously even when he had the ability to do better under kinder guidance. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Lupin demonstrated this contrast when he gently encouraged Neville in defense against the dark arts, leading to a triumphant success against the boggart. This raises a sharp question. If another professor could bring out Neville's potential in a subject equally challenging, why did Snape not adopt similar methods in potions? There is a misconception that a strict and fearsome teacher naturally produces better results, but the reality at Hogwarts shows otherwise. Students like Harry, Ron, and Neville learn to approach potions as a survival exercise, doing the bare minimum to avoid humiliation rather than striving for mastery. Even those who excelled, like Hermione, often did so despite Snape, not because of him. A truly great teacher, one worthy of the title master, would understand that sharing knowledge openly does not diminish authority, it strengthens it. By clinging to an air of exclusivity and contempt, Snape ensured that potions remained an elite art, accessible only to a few. The question then is why? Some might point to his embittered youth, his treatment by James Potter and Sirius Black, or his years as a spy living under constant pressure. Certainly Snape was not a man inclined toward warmth, but even this cannot fully excuse the choice to make learning a punishment. In the magical world where potions can heal, transform and protect, a professor of Snape's caliber had the power to inspire a generation. That he chose instead to guard his mastery behind a wall of scorn suggests a deliberate decision to keep others dependent on him, rather than capable in their own right. It is also telling that Horace Slughorn, Snape's predecessor and eventual successor, approached potions in the opposite way. Slughorn's classes, while selective in their own right, were filled with storytelling, historical anecdotes, and a sense of community. He made brewing feel like a privilege, not a burden. The contrast between Slughorn's and Snape's teaching styles is stark proof that the subject itself was never the problem. It was the man at the front of the room. Under Slughorn, students like Harry saw the allure of potion-making for the first time, even tasting a drop of Felix Felicis as a reward for skill. One could imagine an alternate Hogwarts where Snape took a page from Slughorn's book, where first years were shown a simple but enchanting brew on their first day, where safety was emphasized without suffocating curiosity, and where even the most intimidated students could feel the satisfaction of a potion well brewed. Snape could have introduced advanced electives, perhaps the art of experimental potions, where his own innovations could be studied and replicated. Such a program might have made potions one of the school's most sought-after courses. Even the Slytherins who benefited from his favoritism might have gained more from a truly enriching curriculum. While they enjoyed better marks and leniency, they were denied the full breadth of his knowledge just as much as the Gryffindors were. His own house could have become a breeding ground for potion makers of extraordinary caliber. Instead, they left Hogwarts with an inflated sense of superiority, but without the profound skill their head of house could have instilled in them. The uncomfortable truth is that Snape's classroom was a reflection of his own worldview. He valued control, secrecy, and personal mastery over communal advancement. His greatness lay in his ability to create, adapt, and perfect potions, but he never sought to create equals. In the end, this choice meant that while he was remembered as a brilliant potioneer, he was never truly remembered as a brilliant teacher. The question of why he did not use his influence to inspire remains unanswered, and perhaps that is its own answer, because inspiring others was never his goal. Number 22. Why didn't Snape ever talk to Harry about Lily? Severus Snape's silence on the subject of Lily Potter is one of the most unsettling mysteries in the Harry Potter story. He carried her memory with an almost religious devotion, guarding it more fiercely than any secret in his life. And yet in all the years Harry Potter walked the same castle corridors as him, Snape never once attempted to give the boy a single personal glimpse into who Lily was in his eyes. He never allowed even the smallest fragment of warmth to pass between them, never offered a single sentence that could have told Harry, "I knew her, I valued her, I loved her." The absence of such a moment becomes more jarring when one recalls that Harry grew up with almost no memories of his parents, beyond faded photographs and second-hand stories. Snape, of all people, could have given him something real, something only he possessed. The only time Harry hears Snape speak Lily's name with any sense of tenderness is in the moments after Snape has been fatally wounded, when the truth can no longer change their living relationship. Up to that point, the closest Harry gets to understanding their connection is through overheard arguments and hostile exchanges. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, And when Sirius and Lupin try to explain Snape's bitterness, they frame it entirely in the context of his school rivalry with James. Lily is barely mentioned at all. This lack of acknowledgement feels almost deliberate, as though Snape was determined to erase himself from any narrative of her life, except in his own mind. Consider the moment in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban when Snape escorts Harry, Ron and Hermione back to the castle after the shrieking shack confrontation. He is furious, his usual venom pouring out in sharp, clipped words. In that fury there was never a slip, never a half-spoken remark like, "You should know your mother wouldn't have approved of this." Snape's control in guarding his feelings about Lily was absolute, even when his emotions ran high. It is almost chilling to think that his silence was not just an accident of circumstance, but a choice maintained for years. Snape's motivations for this silence could have been tangled in self-preservation. To speak to Harry about Lily would mean exposing his own vulnerability. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, when we finally see the depth of his love in the pensive memories, it is raw and almost unbearably personal. He shows Dumbledore the Patronus shaped like a silver doe, and Dumbledore, stunned, asks, "After all this time?" Snape answers, "Always." Those words are the closest the reader ever gets to an open confession of love. But this exchange happens in private, with no audience except the headmaster. Harry never hears it until after Snape's death, and that delay is what makes the omission so glaring. The choice to withhold that part of himself also robbed Harry of a bridge between them. Harry's opinion of Snape was built almost entirely on classroom cruelty, public humiliation, and relentless favoritism towards Slytherin. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, when Snape openly mocks Harry's attempts at non-verbal spells, there is no hint of the man who once begged Lily to forgive him, no sign of the boy who grew up alongside her. This disconnect between the Snape Harry knew and the Snape the reader discovers later makes it difficult not to imagine how things might have changed if he had chosen differently. The cost of this silence becomes most evident in the Deathly Hallows during the final confrontation with Voldemort's forces. Snape dies without Harry having any reason to trust him beyond Dumbledore's vague assurances. If Harry had known even a fraction of the truth, that Snape's loyalty was tied to his mother's memory, it might have altered his understanding of the man's actions years earlier. When Harry calls his son Albus Severus, it is not because of any personal bond formed in life, but because of what he learned too late. The irony is heavy. Snape became a hero in Harry's mind only after death revealed what words in life could have done far earlier. There is also the matter of Lily's legacy. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Hagrid tells Harry, "Your mum and dad were as good a witch and wizard as I ever knew." Those words stay with Harry because they are among the first affirmations of his parents he ever receives. Imagine if Snape, who knew Lily from childhood, had once shared a memory, not a confession of love, but perhaps a story of her kindness or courage. He could have said, "She stood up for people who couldn't defend themselves." He could have given Harry something to picture beyond the vague, "she was kind" from others. But instead he guarded those memories like cursed treasure. The cruelty of this omission is heightened by the fact that Snape did not hesitate to remind Harry of James's flaws. In The Order of the Phoenix, Snape deliberately exposes Harry to the memory of James bullying him, a scene that shatters Harry's hero worship of his father. But there is no balancing memory of Lily offered in return, no attempt to give her a voice in Harry's mind. This asymmetry makes Snape's silence feel almost punitive, as if his resentment toward James outweighed his desire to honor Lily in Harry's presence. It is possible Snape believed that speaking of Lily to Harry would be unbearable. Each time he looked into Harry's green eyes, the likeness to Lily was unmistakable, and yet those eyes were set in the face of James Potter. That paradox could have made any conversation about her a constant reopening of wounds. The books make clear how deep that conflict ran. In The Philosopher's Stone, the very first time Snape meets Harry, his gaze lingers on those eyes before he turns cold. From that moment, Snape's interactions with Harry seem designed to keep him at arm's length. Even so, the result is the same. Harry never benefits from the one person who could have told him what Lily was like before she was his mother, before she was the woman murdered by Voldemort. The Marauders could not offer that perspective, neither could Dumbledore, who knew Lily only as an adult. Snape alone carried the memories of the little girl by the riverbank, the teenager brewing potions, the young woman who once called him a friend. These images stayed locked in his mind until the very end, when they became a final gift Harry never asked for. This silence also strips away any chance for reconciliation between them while both were alive. Snape's image in Harry's mind is cemented by years of hostility, detentions, and public humiliation. If Snape had once shared something about Lily, it might have introduced cracks in that image, allowing Harry to see the man as more than an embittered professor. The opportunity was there in countless moments, after the Dementor attack in The Prisoner of Azkaban, during occlumency lessons in the Order of the Phoenix, or even in private detentions, but Snape never took it. When we finally witness Snape's memories in The Deathly Hallows, the effect on Harry is immediate and transformative. The boy who once saw Snape as a petty tormentor suddenly understands him as a man who risked everything out of love for his mother. The tragedy is that this shift happens when Snape can no longer benefit from it. There is no chance for the grudging respect that could have grown between them, no space for Harry to challenge his assumptions in real time. The reveal comes as a posthumous absolution. The stark truth is that Snape's silence was a decision with lasting consequences. Perhaps he saw it as the only way to maintain his double life, or perhaps it was a shield against pain too raw to confront. But in protecting himself, he deprived Harry of a truth that could have reshaped their entire relationship. The man who said always could not bring himself to say, "She mattered to me," when it might have made a difference. That choice, whether born of pride, fear, or self-loathing, remains one of the most uncomfortable questions his character leaves behind. Even in the moments when Snape's actions spoke louder than words, saving Harry from Quirrell's jinxed broom, brewing the wolfsbane potion for Lupin, standing between Harry and Lupin's transformed werewolf form, he never linked those actions to Lily. Harry was left to assume they were acts of reluctant duty, not pieces of a larger devotion. The connection remained invisible, and with it, the possibility of gratitude in life vanished. That is the weight of Snape's silence, a truth carried in secret, revealed too late to heal anything at all. Number 23. Why did Snape never truly choose a side? Severus. Snape's life unfolded in the shadows, and in those shadows lay the heart of the question that refuses to fade. Did he ever truly choose a side? His reputation was built on contradictions. As a Death Eater, he swore loyalty to Lord Voldemort. As a member of Dumbledore's inner circle, he risked his life feeding false information to the Dark Lord. Yet peel back each layer of his story, and it becomes clear that neither ideology nor the greater good dictated his choices. They were driven instead by a single, unshakable obsession with one woman, Lily Evans. Every allegiance, every betrayal, and every whispered vow seemed tethered to that one name, echoing through his every decision like a curse he could never lift. When Harry first meets Snape, the reader sees him through the boy's mistrustful eyes, a figure cloaked in black, with a voice like cold steel, and a demeanor that brooked no warmth. Only in the final chapters of the series, with the reveal of his memories in the Prince's Tale, does the truth emerge. Snape's alliance with Dumbledore was not born from faith in the headmaster's cause. It was a bargain struck after Voldemort, acting on a prophecy Snape had partially delivered, targeted Lily and her family. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Snape's plea to Dumbledore is clear and desperate. "Hide them all, then. Keep them, safe." His words betray not a belief in Dumbledore's fight against the dark arts, but a narrow focus on one person's safety. The tragedy deepens when we see what came after. Lily died. The man who had caused the chain of events leading to her murder did not crumble into guilt-ridden repentance for the wizarding world's sake. He redirected his entire life into protecting her son. But even that protection was poisoned by his complicated feelings toward James Potter. He saw Harry not just as Lily's child, but also as the boy who wore James's face, his hair, his arrogance. Every sneer and cutting remark Snape directed at Harry became a battlefield where his hatred and his vow to protect fought endlessly, with neither truly winning. Snape's dual existence was not merely a survival tactic, it was the very definition of his identity. To the Death Eaters he remained a trusted comrade who had allegedly fooled Dumbledore. To the Order of the Phoenix he was a bitter but invaluable spy. In both worlds he performed his roles with meticulous skill, never slipping enough to be unmasked. Yet this mastery of deception raises an uncomfortable question. If a man plays both sides with equal conviction, is he serving a cause at all, or is he serving only himself? The image of Snape sitting at Voldemort's table in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, silently watching the atrocities committed, lingers. Was his silent strategy, or was it complicity? The most haunting truth is that Snape never seemed to act from moral conviction. He saved Harry multiple times in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone when he blocked Quirrell's jinx during the Quidditch match, and again in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban when he stepped between Harry, Ron, Hermione, and the werewolf Lupin. But each rescue feels transactional, tied back to his promise to Dumbledore rather than any deep-seated belief in protecting innocence. When Dumbledore challenged him in The Half-Blood Prince about his bitterness toward Harry, Snape's sharp retort, "He has her eyes," revealed the truth. Those eyes were the only constant thread pulling him toward heroism. In The Pensieve, we see the night Dumbledore entrusts Snape with the most dangerous mission of all, to kill him when the time comes. Snape's horror at being asked to become a murderer of his only real ally in the Order shows that his loyalty to Dumbledore was personal, not ideological. Dumbledore trusted him because he understood the root of Snape's choices. He knew Snape was not driven by love for the light or hatred for the dark, but by a singular wound that never healed. The headmaster even said in that infamous conversation, "You have kept Lily Potter's son safe out of love for her." Love, not duty, was the fulcrum on which Snape's entire double life balanced. This personal motivation does not automatically erase the courage it took to maintain his dangerous role. For years, Snape walked the knife's edge between discovery and death. He lied convincingly to the most skilled legilimens in the world. He played his part in meetings where one wrong word could end his life. But these feats were less the acts of a crusader for justice than the survival of a man fulfilling a personal vow. In many ways, his secrecy and manipulations mirrored Voldemort's own talent for control and deception, though they were applied to different ends. Consider the night on the Astronomy Tower. Draco Malfoy stood paralyzed, unable to fulfill Voldemort's command to kill Dumbledore. Snape stepped forward, casting the killing curse himself. The scene, brutal in its finality, solidified his image as a murderer to the Order and a loyal Death Eater to Voldemort. But the truth, revealed later, was that he was carrying out a pact with Dumbledore, an act of mercy disguised as loyalty to darkness. Even here, Snape's choice was personal. He spared Draco from becoming a killer, preserved his own cover, and honored his promise to Dumbledore in one calculated motion. Snape's inability to wholly commit to either cause might be the very thing that made him so effective a spy. If he had been a true believer in Dumbledore's vision, he might have stumbled in convincing Voldemort of his loyalty. If he had been a true servant of Voldemort, he might have faltered in shielding Harry at critical moments. His moral detachment allowed him to be exactly what each side needed to see. But it also left him in a liminal space, too compromised to be a symbol of the light, too resistant to fully embrace the dark. This ambiguity complicates the idea of him as a hero. Heroism traditionally demands selflessness, a willingness to sacrifice for the greater good. Snape's sacrifices were immense. His reputation, his safety, his peace of mind, but they were not offered to the wizarding world. They were laid at the altar of Lily's memory. It is this narrow focus that makes his story so unsettling. He saved countless lives indirectly, yet it was never those lives he set out to save. The bitterness that colored his every interaction suggests he knew this truth himself. Snape was not comfortable in either role because he was not at home in either ideology. He remained the boy from Spinner's End, the outcast who found belonging neither with the Death Eaters nor with the Order. His allegiance was to his own private war, one fought not for power or justice, but for atonement he could never truly win. The fact that this private war coincided with Dumbledore's larger struggle was an accident of history, not a matter of principle. In the end, even his death fits the pattern. When Nagini struck in the Shrieking Shack, Voldemort's reasoning was as cold as it was strategic. He believed Snape's death would make the Elder Wand truly his. Snape's final moments were not spent proclaiming loyalty to Dumbledore's cause nor cursing Voldemort's name. They were spent looking into Harry's eyes, Lily's eyes, asking the boy to look at me, as if seeing that reflection was the only absolution he could claim. It was a farewell not to a comrade in arms, but to the ghost he had chased all his life. This is the heart of the uncomfortable question. Can a man be called a hero if his actions, however brave, serve only his own grief? Snape's double game may have been the key to Voldemort's downfall, yet it was never his war in the way it was for Harry, Hermione, or even Neville Longbottom. His war began and ended with Lily. Whether that makes him a tragic hero, an anti-hero, or simply a man who happened to stand in the right place at the right time is a question the wizarding world will argue over for generations. In truth, Snape's story resists simple labels. He was neither purely self-serving nor purely altruistic. His life was a web of calculated risks, personal vendettas, and quiet acts of protection. He played both sides because he could not belong to either. That is what makes his legacy so complex, and why the question of whether he ever truly chose a side may never have a comfortable answer. Number 24. Why did Snape let grudges affect his professional decisions? Severus. Snape entered the classroom every September with the same cold eyes, the same sharp tone, and the same unmistakable aura of contempt for certain students. In the dungeons of Hogwarts, where the air was damp and the shelves brimmed with bottled horrors, his lessons were as much about fear as they were about potion-making. But beneath the surface of his carefully controlled demeanor, there was a truth that was harder to ignore. Snape carried his grudges into his teaching, letting them seep into every interaction with students who reminded him of his past. This was not a matter of one or two bad days. It was a pattern spanning years, a deep-rooted inability or unwillingness to separate personal resentment from professional responsibility. The most glaring example was his treatment of Harry Potter. From the very first potions class in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Snape's dislike was palpable. He addressed Harry not as a student eager to learn, but as a trespasser in his domain. The text makes it plain, "Mr. Potter, our new celebrity." That sneer was more than sarcasm. It was a declaration that, for Snape, Harry was not an 11-year-old boy, but the son of James Potter, his childhood nemesis. No matter what Harry did, Snape filtered it through the lens of schoolyard humiliation from decades past. Every perceived mistake became proof of arrogance. Every success was met with suspicion. The injustice was not subtle, it was systemic. This personal vendetta was not limited to Harry. Neville Longbottom, shy and painfully insecure, became another unintended victim of Snape's bias. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Neville's fear of Snape was so intense that his boggart, meant to embody one's worst fear, transformed into Snape himself. The humiliation didn't end there. After Neville successfully defeated the boggart in Lupin's defense against the dark arts class, Snape retaliated, docking points from Gryffindor and suggesting that Neville's grandmother might hear of his performance. Such actions were not discipline, they were targeted reminders of who held the power in the classroom. This was an educator using fear to reinforce personal dominance, punishing not poor academic performance but the audacity of existing in his presence. Even students with no direct connection to his past were not spared. Hermione Granger, whose only crime was her relentless pursuit of academic excellence, found herself belittled in ways that would have crushed a less confident child. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, when Hermione answered a question correctly, Snape's response was not praise but venom. "I see no difference," he said when she pointed out the insult of being called an insufferable know-it-all. This was not the constructive criticism of a teacher guiding a student toward balance. It was an attack meant to diminish her enthusiasm and assert his authority. 4. Hermione, it was a reminder that in Snape's classroom, knowledge was not the path to respect. The contradiction in Snape's behavior was sharp. Here was a man of remarkable intellect, a wizard capable of inventing spells and brewing potions beyond the reach of most, yet he failed, in the simplest duty of a teacher, to provide an environment where students could learn without fear of personal vendettas. His sharp mind could anticipate a potion's reaction with surgical precision, but he could not control the emotional reactions that clouded his professional judgment. In this sense, Snape's brilliance became almost tragic. He could master magic, but not himself. His defenders often argue that Snape's cruelty was a mask, a necessary part of his double life, or even a form of twisted protection for Harry. But the books provide more than enough evidence that his bias was personal and raw. Harry's resemblance to James was a constant trigger, and Snape admitted as much in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix when Sirius accused him of bullying. Snape's retort, "You think I'm enjoying myself, do you?" wasn't a denial of the behavior, but rather an attempt to justify it under the guise of necessity. The reality is that his vendettas were not tactical maneuvers, they were deeply ingrained habits. The consequences of this unprofessional conduct rippled through the lives of his students. Harry, who already faced immense pressure as the boy who lived, was denied a mentor in potions and instead received a relentless antagonist. Neville's confidence in magic was eroded to the point that he hesitated in classes where Snape was absent, afraid to make mistakes that might echo back to the dungeons. Hermione, though resilient, endured public humiliation that could easily have silenced a less determined student. These were not isolated moments, they were cumulative blows to the spirits of young wizards and witches. Snape's unwillingness to separate past from present also distorted his sense of fairness. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, when Draco Malfoy insulted Neville during class, Snape ignored the comment but seized on the opportunity to mock Neville's potion-making skills. The underlying message was clear. In his classroom, justice was not blind, it was selective, meted out according to his personal preferences. A Slytherin's misstep was overlooked, a Gryffindor's was magnified. Such favoritism did not merely harm individual students, it undermined the very values Hogwarts claimed to uphold. There is an argument to be made that Snape's bitterness was born from genuine suffering. His teenage years were marked by bullying from James Potter and others, compounded by a lonely, difficult home life. But the tragedy of his story lies in the fact that he allowed these old wounds to dictate his interactions with children who had nothing to do with those events. Rather than breaking the cycle of cruelty, he perpetuated it. inflicting on his students the same humiliation he once endured. In doing so, he ensured that the legacy of pain extended into another generation. The hypocrisy becomes starker when one considers Snape's own ideals. He valued precision, discipline, and mastery of one's craft. Yet in the most important craft of all, shaping young minds, he was reckless and vindictive. His inability to pause his emotions for the sake of the greater good was not just a personal flaw, it was a professional failure. A teacher's role is to prepare students for challenges beyond the classroom, but Snape seemed more invested in reminding certain students of their inferiority than in helping them rise above it. There were moments, rare but telling, when Snape's potential as a teacher shone through. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, his calm, methodical instructions to the class when brewing complex potions revealed what he was capable of when unburdened by personal animosity. His skill was unmatched, his explanations clear, his standards high. These glimpses make the reality of his day-to-day conduct all the more frustrating. He could have been a mentor to rival Dumbledore or McGonagall, yet he chose the path of enmity. One cannot ignore the irony that Snape, who risked his life to protect students from Voldemort's influence, simultaneously damaged some of them emotionally through his own classroom conduct. His courage in the face of danger does not erase the harm caused by years of favoritism, humiliation, and targeted cruelty. In the end, bravery and bitterness coexisted in him, and the latter often won out in the confines of the dungeon. The question then is not whether Snape was intelligent or brave, he was both, but why he allowed his emotional scars to shape his professional choices. The simple truth is that intelligence does not guarantee emotional maturity, and courage in battle does not ensure fairness in the classroom. Snape's story is a cautionary tale about the necessity of self-awareness in positions of authority. Without it, even the most gifted individuals can become obstacles to the growth of those they are meant to guide. When viewed through the lens of teaching ethics, Snape's actions raise an uncomfortable truth. Holding on to personal resentment, no matter how justified it may feel, can transform a teacher from a source of inspiration into a source of dread. In Hogwarts, a school meant to nurture the magical potential of every child, this was not merely a personal failing, it was a betrayal of the institution's purpose. Harry, Neville, and Hermione were not just students in his class, they were young people whose futures were shaped, for better or worse, by the adults entrusted with their care. Snape, for all his genius, too often chose to shape them through fear. Even in his final moments, when the truth of his sacrifices came to light, the memories Harry saw in the pensieve did not erase the experiences of the dungeon classroom. The complexity of Snape's character is undeniable. He was a hero in some ways, a villain in others, but one thing remains clear. His inability to set aside old grudges deprived many of his students of the teacher they deserved. For all his brilliance, that failure lingers as one of the most human and most tragic aspects of Severus Snape. Number 25. Why didn't Snape save Lily when there was still a chance? When Severus Snape learned about the prophecy from Sybil Trelawney, the moment should have been decisive. He had overheard only part of it in the Hog's Head, and rushed to tell Lord Voldemort. Yet when the truth sank in, that Lily Evans, the only person he had ever loved, was in mortal danger, he did not run to Godric's Hollow himself. He did not try to reach her through any secret network or personal letter. Instead, he went straight to Albus Dumbledore and begged him to save her. This was the point where his choices became complicated and uncomfortable to defend. A man who truly intended to rescue someone with his own hands could have tried more than one approach. But Snape placed the burden entirely on Dumbledore, a man he barely trusted, instead of acting directly. It is important to remember that Snape knew Lily personally for years. He knew her friends, her personality, even her temper. He also knew, through the Order of the Phoenix's reputation, that many of its members had secret hideouts and ways of communicating. And yet, when urgency was at its peak, he did not attempt to contact James or Lily himself. The books tell us he was desperate. "Hide them all, then," he told Dumbledore. "Keep them safe, please." The plea reveals that he was aware James and Harry would be part of the deal, yet still his words made it clear that Lily was his true concern. The cold reality is that Snape left the entire rescue to someone else's decisions, hoping that a single conversation would be enough to stop the Dark Lord. This lack of direct intervention becomes more glaring when we consider the timeline. After Snape warned Dumbledore, there were still days, perhaps weeks, before Voldemort found Godric's Hollow. Harry was not born that very night, nor was the attack immediate. Dumbledore was already working on the Fidelius charm plan with the Potters. Snape, however, was not seen visiting the couple, nor sending a Patronus to signal them, nor shadowing them to intercept danger. He retreated into Dumbledore's shadow, as if his personal responsibility ended the moment he asked for help. For someone who later risked everything to protect Harry at Hogwarts, the earlier passivity stands in contrast. Some may argue that Snape's position as a Death Eater left him with no safe route to Lily. Voldemort would have suspected disloyalty if Snape had been seen near the Potters, but this argument is weakened by the fact that other Order members took great risks without hesitation. Sirius Black, for instance, confronted Peter Pettigrew openly, knowing it would ruin his life. James Potter joined missions that endangered him every week. Even Remus Lupin, under suspicion himself, tried to stay connected. Snape had skills in potions, in stealth, and in secrecy spells that could have been deployed to shield Lily's family, if only he had been willing to use them outside Dumbledore's plan. The emotional weight of Snape's plea also raises questions. Was it truly a plan, or merely a desperate cry to the only man he thought could control events? His life after that night suggests the latter. He bound himself to Dumbledore's will as a penance, but the proactive courage to confront danger directly was missing when Lily was still alive. In The Prince's Tale, Harry witnesses Snape's memory of kneeling before Dumbledore, his face twisted in agony. The moment is drenched in regret, but it is a regret already rooted in the knowledge that he had not acted beyond that conversation. Once the Potters were betrayed by their secret keeper, Snape could only pick up the broken pieces. What makes this even more troubling is Snape's capacity for cunning and manipulation. In other contexts, he orchestrated elaborate schemes to mislead both the Death Eaters and the Order. He convinced Voldemort that he was his most loyal servant, while feeding Dumbledore critical information. He found ways to pass messages under the Dark Lord's nose. If such abilities were available to him in the years after Lily's death, why were they absent in the days before it? The uncomfortable possibility is that Snape did not conceive of rescuing Lily himself as a realistic option. His mind, trained to serve under authority, sought someone with greater influence to solve the crisis. There is also the human element of pride. Snape, by asking Dumbledore for help, avoided the humiliation of facing James Potter directly. His rivalry with James had been bitter, and the idea of showing up at Godric's Hollow, begging the man he hated to let him protect his wife, might have been intolerable to him. This flaw of character is part of why the question is so uncomfortable. Love for Lily may have been strong, but not strong enough to eclipse old grudges in the decisive moment. The result was fatal. Voldemort came, Peter Pettigrew's betrayal succeeded, and Lily's sacrifice became the only barrier between Harry and death. Snape's defenders often point to the fact that Dumbledore's protection plan was the best available. The Fidelius charm, if performed with an unbreakable secret keeper, would have made the Potters unreachable. But this argument collapses in hindsight because the charm failed due to a choice of secret keeper that could have been questioned. Snape, if he had been directly involved, might have seen through Peter Pettigrew's weaknesses, or at least voiced suspicion. Yet by staying out of the loop, he surrendered all influence over crucial details. It was a gamble, one he placed entirely in Dumbledore's hands, and the loss was permanent. From a moral perspective, the decision is revealing. Snape's later life was defined by long-term acts of bravery, but in the moment of greatest personal stakes, he did not display the active heroism that we associate with self-sacrifice. It is easier to die for a cause when there is a clear role to play. It is harder to step into chaos, to face an enemy without permission, and to act on love rather than strategy. Snape, at that time, was still bound by his identity as a Death Eater, still accustomed to following orders rather than breaking them. His love for Lily motivated a plea, but not an independent rescue. The tragedy is compounded by the irony that Snape would later risk his life repeatedly for Harry, a boy who embodied everything painful for him: James's features, Lily's eyes, the reminder of his own failure. Protecting Harry became his lifelong punishment, but also his redemption. The man who could not bring himself to knock on Lily's door before Voldemort did was the same man who stood between her son and death for 7 years. This sharp contrast between inaction when it mattered most and relentless action afterward deepens the moral ambiguity of his character. In the larger story, Snape's choice reflects a common human failing: the belief that asking someone powerful to fix a problem absolves you of personal responsibility. Dumbledore, the leader of the Order, was indeed the most capable wizard to organize protection, but delegating entirely to him meant that Snape never owned the mission. If Dumbledore failed, so did Snape. When Voldemort killed Lily, the guilt was unbearable precisely because deep down, Snape knew he could have tried more. This guilt is visible in his later behavior. His protection of Harry was not motivated by affection, but by an unyielding debt. Every spell cast in Harry's defense, every risk taken, was a shadow of that night in Godric's Hollow. Snape's own words years later to Dumbledore, "You've kept him alive so that he can die at the proper moment," carry an echo of bitterness, as if he understood too well the cost of trusting others with lives you value. The pain was not only for Lily's death, but for his own passivity in the hours when she could still be saved. Looking back, it is hard to escape the feeling that Snape's plea to Dumbledore was an emotional gesture more than a tactical decision. It was a cry for someone else to bear the weight, to take the risk he could not. For readers, this raises the haunting question: if the person you love most is in danger, do you run to them yourself, or do you go to the one you think has more power? In Snape's case, the answer cost him the rest of his life in penance. He never got the chance to see whether his own direct action could have changed the ending. Even in his final moments, when he gave Harry his memories, the truth of his love for Lily did not erase the reality of that earlier choice. It remained the unspoken wound beneath his every act. The bravery that history remembers was forged in the fire of his failure, but it was still failure. And the uncomfortable truth is that the man who defied Voldemort, spied for the Order, and stood unflinching in the face of death was not that man yet when Lily needed him most. He was still a man who hoped someone else could save her. Number 26. Why didn't Snape teach Harry vital spells that could save lives? Severus Snape's role in Harry Potter's life was always cloaked in shadows, his motives layered beneath a mask of disdain. Yet when one examines the events from Harry's first year at Hogwarts to the final battle, a troubling question emerges. If Snape's true mission, as revealed in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, was to keep the boy alive for as long as possible, why did he never arm him with the magical tools necessary to survive? Snape was a wizard of immense skill, particularly in defensive magic and dueling. He had survived Voldemort's inner circle, fooled the Dark Lord himself, and mastered some of the most complex spells in the wizarding world. And yet Harry graduated from Snape's classes never having been taught more than the bare minimum required by the official curriculum. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, during a tense lesson, Snape berated Harry over his lack of knowledge, but he never bridged that gap himself. The boy who was destined to face the most dangerous dark wizard in history left Snape's classroom without learning the kind of protective magic that could mean the difference between life and death. The irony becomes sharper when we recall that Snape excelled in the exact fields that could have saved lives. He was a master of non-verbal spells, a form of magic. Harry only began to learn from Professor Flitwick, and more seriously, from Snape himself during occlumency lessons in the Order of the Phoenix. Even then, the focus was narrow. Snape taught Harry how to close his mind to intrusion, but never how to shield himself in combat or counter the most common curses. Harry was left to stumble into these discoveries on his own, relying on quick thinking and luck rather than training. When facing Death Eaters in the Department of Mysteries, he improvised rather than executed rehearsed techniques. Snape had the knowledge to prepare him, but it remained locked behind a wall of hostility. One cannot ignore the fact that Snape was deeply versed in counter-curses and defensive wards. His very survival as a double agent hinged on these abilities. In the Half-Blood Prince, he demonstrated lightning reflexes and precise spellwork during the skirmish at Hogwarts, the scene where he easily deflects Harry's attacks, blocking a bodybind curse, repelling a disarming charm, and even knocking Harry down without uttering an incantation shows the breadth of his skill. These were techniques Harry could have benefited from immensely in the years prior, especially given how often he faced life-threatening encounters. Yet Snape never allowed such demonstrations to become lessons. In their shared time, the only direct training Harry received from him was laden with contempt, reducing any chance of constructive learning. This omission is more than negligence, it becomes almost strategic. Under the guise of maintaining his cover as a hostile professor, Snape kept Harry in the dark. One might argue this was in accordance with Dumbledore's instructions. Dumbledore himself often withheld critical information, as with the prophecy or the existence of the Horcruxes, but the difference lies in immediacy. Dumbledore concealed long-term truths, while Snape could have provided immediate, life-saving skills disguised as standard coursework. He could have slipped advanced shield charms or counter-hexes into ordinary lessons without revealing any secret allegiance. Harry could have learned spells like Protego Maxima or the art of silent casting years before necessity forced him into desperate improvisation. An illuminating contrast comes from Professor Lupin's brief tenure in The Prisoner of Azkaban. In just 1 year, Lupin equipped Harry with the Patronus Charm, a powerful and difficult spell far beyond the third-year curriculum. Lupin recognized the boy's need and responded without hesitation, preparing him for Dementor attacks that otherwise would have incapacitated him. This raises the uncomfortable reality. If Lupin could adapt his lessons to Harry's urgent needs, why couldn't Snape? His refusal becomes harder to defend when viewed against this backdrop. Lupin's teaching saved Harry's life on multiple occasions. Snape's refusal to share similarly advanced knowledge left Harry vulnerable in ways that feel almost deliberate. A key moment that highlights the cost of this omission occurs in the Goblet of Fire during the graveyard duel with Voldemort. Harry's only real defense is the Expelliarmus spell, a charm so basic it is often considered a beginner's move. Against Death Eaters skilled in the dark arts, Expelliarmus is barely adequate. If Snape's mission was to ensure Harry's survival until the right time, why allow him to enter such battles with only a schoolboy's toolset? Spells like Protego Totalum or advanced stunning charms could have shifted the balance, and Snape had decades of experience in them. The absence of this knowledge in Harry's arsenal speaks volumes. One might speculate that Snape feared drawing Voldemort's suspicion. Any sign of special training for Harry could have exposed his double role, yet Snape was already walking a tightrope, acting in ways that skirted suspicion without breaking his cover. He had opportunities, private detentions, moments during occlumency lessons, where he could have introduced subtle techniques without revealing their purpose. Teaching Harry the reflex to cast a nonverbal shield or to counter the Cruciatus curse could have been framed as disciplining his lack of skill rather than an act of kindness. The fact that Snape never took even these covert opportunities suggests personal motives intertwined with strategic caution. The personal factor cannot be ignored. Snape's animosity toward Harry, fueled by the boy's uncanny resemblance to James Potter, colored every interaction. His contempt often overrode practical considerations, making it easier to justify withholding help. In the Philosopher's Stone, Snape's first act as Harry's teacher is to humiliate him in front of the class. This tone never truly shifts, even when Harry becomes a direct target of Voldemort's forces. Protecting Harry from death did not equate in Snape's mind to helping him succeed or empowering him beyond the bare minimum. His role was guardian in the shadows, not mentor in the light. Even during the height of the Second Wizarding War, when danger was no longer hypothetical, Snape maintained this distance. In The Half-Blood Prince, he agreed to monitor Draco Malfoy under Dumbledore's orders, even going so far as to make the unbreakable vow to protect him. Yet with Harry, there was no comparable investment in readiness. Snape's interactions with him were reactive, not proactive, intervening when Harry was on the brink, but never building his ability to handle threats independently. The result was a boy constantly forced to survive by instinct rather than preparation. A poignant example comes in the Order of the Phoenix during the battle at the Department of Mysteries. The young members of Dumbledore's army faced Death Eaters armed with lethal magic. Most of them relied on disarming charms, stunning spells, and impediment jinxes, serviceable but hardly enough against experienced duelists. Harry, the primary target, had no advanced combat magic at his disposal beyond what he had self-taught or learned from peers. The absence of sophisticated defences here is glaring, especially when one considers that Snape was present in the castle for much of that year. A quiet word, a punishment exercise designed to drill a defensive manoeuvre, could have changed the outcome for the better. There is also the question of trust. Dumbledore trusted Snape with his own life, relying on him to carry out the most delicate and dangerous tasks. Yet he did not instruct him, at least not visibly, to prepare Harry in these practical ways. If this was indeed part of a deliberate plan, it was a perilous gamble. The idea may have been to ensure that Harry faced his trials unprepared, forcing the protection of others around him and keeping the timeline under control. But in doing so, they risked those very protectors' lives, and many of them, Sirius Black, Alastor Moody, Remus Lupin, did not survive. When one remembers Snape's own invented spells, the omission becomes even more stark. In The Half-Blood Prince, Harry discovers the annotated potions textbook filled with Snape's personal modifications and original creations, including the vicious Sectumsempra. This spell alone shows Snape's deep inventiveness and mastery of combat magic. If he could invent such a powerful curse, he certainly knew equally powerful defensive spells, perhaps even unique ones. Yet Harry was left to stumble upon Snape's magical legacy by accident rather than through deliberate teaching. That accidental discovery underscores the gap between what Snape could have offered and what he actually gave. The consequences of this choice ripple throughout the series. Without early exposure to advanced magic, Harry was constantly at a disadvantage in duels, relying heavily on improvisation and the loyalty of his friends. While this resourcefulness is often celebrated as a core strength of his character, it is worth asking whether it needed to be his primary survival strategy. Snape's inaction in this area becomes one of the more uncomfortable truths of his complex character. He saved Harry in moments, but rarely empowered him for the future. Even after the revelation of Snape's true loyalties, this gap remains unexplained in the narrative. His love for Lily Potter drove him to protect her son, but perhaps that love was bound by the limits of his own emotional wounds. Teaching Harry, really teaching him, would have meant spending time in something other than mutual resentment. It would have required breaking the persona he had so carefully constructed to deceive Voldemort. Whether this was impossible or merely undesirable is left to the reader's interpretation. What remains is the uneasy truth that the man who saved Harry's life multiple times also denied him the tools that might have saved others. The complexity of Snape's character lies in these contradictions. He was both protector and obstacle, savior and withholder. His actions in the shadows kept Harry alive long enough to fulfill his destiny, but his silence in the classroom left the boy underprepared for the battles that destiny demanded. This duality is part of why Snape remains one of the most debated figures in the Harry Potter series. The question of why he did not teach Harry more is not easily answered, and perhaps that is why it lingers, an unresolved thread in a tapestry of loyalty, bitterness, and sacrifice.